Welcome, folks.
Hello, hello.
Hi.
This is great. So this is a, let me see, we have people online. So people joined, please put in the comments where you're joining from. And we'll give it a minute for people to join. Say where you're from. I will put you on the spotlights here. We're streaming live in LinkedIn and YouTube. And if you're watching the recording, you are seeing us from the future, probably in the fall. But yeah, today's episode is a great one. We're going to have the topic of Argo CD, and we have some of the Argo CD maintainers from Intuit. Let's go through introductions. I'm one of the hosts in the platform's community. We have a LinkedIn page. We have a YouTube channel. Please follow us and join the page and watch some of the other streams that we have done. So we concentrate here on platform engineering topics, and today's topic is around the Argo project, the CNCF project. So let's go over introductions. Who wants to go first?
I'll go first. My name is Katie, and I am a product manager at Intuit, and I'm a member of the Argo community, which is super fun. So you may be familiar with either a couple of talks that I've done, if you've watched some of the talks online, or if you've been to ArgoCon. And I was also recently the MC at ArgoCon London, which was super fun and an amazing experience.
Yeah, Katie did an excellent job in the last KubeCon in London. I was there, so she did a great job on stage, getting people excited and entertained and focused on the topics. And we had even a fun exercise. So if you attend ArgoCon Atlanta, probably we'll see some more fun activities like that. Michael, main person here.
Hello, everybody. So I'm Michael Crenshaw, and I realized I've failed to put Intuit in all the right places. I cut them off up there, and I didn't put them by my name, but I work at Intuit. I'm a software engineer on our team, which shares responsibility for Argo CD and rollouts at Intuit. And I'm also a lead on the Argo CD project. So if you see the name Crenshaw in the open source repo, that's me.
Yeah, and Intuit has an open source office, and they have good swag. Here. I have my Intuit teacher. I don't remember which KubeCon ArgoCon was, but this is one of the. I have a few Argo teachers, and this is one of my favorite ones. So let's start kick off things, and then as folks join, you can ask questions on the topics that we discuss. And we'll put them on screen, and I'll pause to get them addressed. So this is a live stream. Please join, share the link so people can join today. We have a few minutes. Want to kick it off, Katie?
Yep. All right, so today we're going to be talking about GitOps excellence. We're going to touch on Argo CD 3.0, the greatest new release that we just had with some really exciting maturity enhancements. And then we're going to talk about the future of promotions. What is next for Argo? What problems are we looking at? Maybe they're affecting you, maybe they're not, but learn what we're going to be tackling from the Intuit side of things when looking at Argo.
Yep. And it should be 3.x, right? Things move so fast that as today, we have a 3.1 release candidate.
Exactly, yeah.
Can you move the slides? Or what's the control, Michael?
Yeah.
Go.
Yeah, so just to give a little bit of background about Intuit and open source, Intuit is the creator of Argo CD, Argo rollouts, which is huge, right? And we believe in the impact that open source can make on the community. And so Intuit donated the Argo project to the CNCF, which led us winning to 2 end user awards, one in 2019 and one in 2022. So we're super excited about that, and we're continuing to contribute anything and everything that we do with Argo back into open source to make sure that the things that are directly affecting us, that we're trying to improve for ourselves, that we can directly make that impact on the community as well, and everyone can improve together.
Yeah, I will drop a link to a documentary of Argo if people want to watch that. It goes over the history, right, of Argo and how it started into it. I believe it was Argo Workflows back then, and Argo CD is most popular, one of the most other projects.
Yeah, and Argo Workflows is kind of where I got my start in the Argo ecosystem, so that holds a special place in my heart. So let me talk for a quick second about Argo CD 3.0, and then we'll talk about kind of what's in the future. So as you mentioned, Argo CD 3.1, we've already gotten RC for it, but 3.0 was a big deal for us because it gave us the opportunity to really push Argo's maturity forward. So it had been, I think, 2 to 3 years since we had cut a major release. And one of the main things we wanted to do was just flex that muscle and get used to cutting new major versions, because as Argo CD has matured, we've realized, well, some features it's time to deprecate, some things about the API we need to change. So this gave us the opportunity to send out deprecation notices, remove a few small things, make some small changes that were pretty safe. And that puts us in a good position to make potentially bigger changes in the future with a 4.0, et cetera. We also took the opportunity to harden security. So there were a lot of defaults that could have been better, more secure, but we couldn't really change them because we didn't want to disrupt folks' workflows. So we took this chance to go ahead and change those. And then finally, we did some big performance optimizations. And I've heard great things about the ability of Argo to handle really, really big clusters with lots of churn starting in 3.0 due to some enhancements that we shipped. So really exciting release. A specific feature that's pretty exciting, it actually came out in 2.14, but 3.0 is...
Michael,
Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to ask, ask something that in some other CNCF projects, when they do a major number release, right, version, like going from 1 dot something to 2 dot something, it's usually when the APIs are going to be like removed, right? That people are like very afraid of that.
Yeah.
That's not a case. Something that the community, I guess, debated of like, if we call it 3, people will think they have to change to a different API, new CRDs, or if we don't call it, then it's demarcation. So I think it's a little bit different, right? For 3.0, there's no APIs removed.
Correct. The Kubernetes APIs, so application, app project, app set, all of those APIs, they're staying at V1 Alpha 1, where they've been for a very long time. 3.0, I wanted it to be a chance for us to get used to sort of the simpler versioning things. At some point, we will want to version some of those APIs. They've matured enough and we've learned enough that it's the time will come. But for now, we're not doing that. And we'll talk about a different project a little bit later, but in that project, an open source project, I'm working with folks to sort of build the knowledge around how to do API version upgrades so that we can provide that as a really great experience for our users.
Right.
Cool. Yeah, so speaking of API changes, source hydrator is not a breaking change, but it was a new field in the application resource that basically implements the rendered manifest pattern as a first-class Argo CD feature. So what you're seeing here is on the left side, I'm making a change to like the version of the cert manager dependency in a Helm chart. And as you know, like making a one-line change can produce a lot of YAML that looks different. So the source hydrator on the right side renders that manifest, pushes it to a Git branch, and gives you a full history of all the changes that you've made in a fully rendered state. So you're meant to read the top of the Argo CD panel there, like first you hydrate, then you sync whatever you hydrated, and then we look at the state of the result of that sync. And that feature is going to lead into some additional enhancements that Katie will get into in a minute. Cool. I'll go ahead and pass it to you, Katie, if there aren't questions from Carlos about that part.
Yeah. No, hydrator. So one aspect that I think people should know about Argo CD is, man, there's people in the Slack channel telling me like they're running Argo CD 2.5, right, 2.6, and I think it's the result of the Argo CD's willingness to be backwards compatible, right? I don't know if that comes from you or the other maintainers, but like this insisting of like, we're not going to create a new hydrator CRD, right? We're going to go and put this new feature in the one of the CRDs that exists, right? The Argo projects, Argo application, and add a new field that is backwards compatible, so that if you're not using it, your 2.7 to 14 doesn't break, and that makes people very comfortable staying in the same version. But I think that's something that we have to promote more of. Like, we'll be willing to give you a user experience, but platform people, right, should be aware that you should be keep up with the new versions because of the security, right? CVE patches, the maintainers are not patching this old version. So we usually a couple of releases back and forward, and that's it. But that's something that I wanted to highlight, that you went and added a field to an existing CRD versus you could just create a new CRD, right, and have people use that. So it's a trade-off of API design, I guess, that goes into a lot of thought and process. And I guess Intuit is one of the consumers, right, that you can vet of, like, what is the impact of introducing a new CRD? What is the impact of a breaking change?
Yeah, and we talked a long time about whether or not we wanted to introduce a new CRD versus embed in the application CRD. And not to get too much into the weeds, but when you embed features, you get a ton of functionality that Argo CD already builds around that CR. So ultimately, we went that direction. But as you say, there are trade-offs either way you go.
Yeah, and if you want to learn more, like Katie said, the open source project, many companies are contributing, and it could be code, it could be docs, it could be API design, right? So what's next?
All right, off to Katie. And I'm trying to change slides, Carlos, but it seems to be stuck for me.
Let me see.
And I can switch over to screen share if it causes us trouble.
I'm putting it back to the.
Yeah, so just to, and I'll ad lib a little bit here while our slides are coming up. So to talk about what's next. So we ran a Argo CD survey, an Argo project survey, one of the sub surveys. There was an Argo workflow survey, an Argo event survey, then there was an Argo CD survey, where we really wanted to hear from the community about what is exactly the pain points that people are experiencing. What are the things that are working really well about Argo CD and what do people like about it? But where can we improve? What can we help with next? And so an aspect of that is promotions, organizing your promotions, orchestrating your promotions across environments. And Intuit sees a lot of these pain points today. So if we go to the next slide, I'll walk you through exactly what Intuit does today during our deployment process. So we are running Jenkins internally. And as you can see, this is an example of a Jenkins pipeline that has currently built an artifact, pushed it to Artifactory. We've done some analysis against it. And now we're getting ready to deploy that artifact to subsequent environments. And so this is how we understand today, okay, when I'm doing a deployment, here is the health status of that environment. As you see within that red box, there's a green check, which is great. That means, hey, according to this pipeline and according to the logs in this pipeline, my deployment went through and dev is in a good state because everything executed well within that pipeline, which is great within that aspect of the pipeline. But if anything changes, the status of this pipeline doesn't change because it represented the state at which happened at that point in time. And so that's something that we found ourselves struggling with as we continue to evolve and wanting to make sure that we understand, hey, as we're continuously increasing our velocity and we're trying to do more deployments, I need to make sure that the state of my environments are healthy always while I'm doing these deployments. And this doesn't necessarily give us that full and complete view. So that's problem number one.
One thing that you just like mentioned and didn't say anything is you're using Jenkins, right? And Intuit at scale, right? It's in a big enterprise. I guess a large number of deployments. Do you know what is the scale that you do?
Yeah, we do over 2,000 PRs per week. So our scale is massive. And that's not only from the Jenkins side of things, but it's from the Argo CD side of things as well. And Jenkins isn't just necessarily used for releases, right? We run automated tests against Jenkins. We scale
Docker
to
build.
millions of builds.
Yeah, and I bring it up because I do a lot of consultancy around platform engineering, and folks, end users think that when they're modernizing their CI/CD pipelines or deployments, they want to move into the new latest project and move everything, right? So they ask me like, hey, how do we start moving to GitOps? Use Argo CD. So how do we replace the Jenkins with Argo workflows or something else? I'm like, you don't have to replace everything. Don't replace your platform, right? Just modernize parts of your platform, and never say that you're building a new platform, because that will take a long time for in terms of process. Like, you're modernizing the current platform, taking some part that Jenkins was doing, take it away, and then give it to Argo CD, and then look if the other stuff needs to be replaced or not. If it's working, right, why change it? But you don't have to replace everything just to adopt something from the Argo project, in this case, Argo CD. So
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's something really interesting as well, right? Because we're constantly looking at efficiencies within the process, within our development process that we're providing for our developers, right? So even though, yes, Jenkins is, could be considered a legacy technology, we're not trying to do a lift and shift off of Jenkins, right? We're trying to find those particular pain points that our developers are experiencing and making sure that we introduce tooling that makes them more efficient, and not just moving on to another technology that is going to have those same efficiencies. It's very similar to when people were going through cloud migrations, right? When everyone was on-prem and, companies like AWS became really big, and we're like, oh, we'll just move everything to AWS. But you can't just lift and shift to AWS, just like you can't lift and shift from Jenkins to GitHub Actions, for example.
Yeah, just wanted to highlight that it's okay to modernize your platform in capabilities, right? Like, platform engineering is in terms of like a set of capabilities, and CD, right? Continuous deployment and continuous delivery, continuous promotions, continuous builds, continuous testing, right? You don't have to replace everything at once. Some people do that, and then it takes a year to build a new platform, right? Where you can just concentrate on maybe one capability that will give you a lot for your investment, right? The ROI is there. So so let's move it along to the next topic of what's happening here.
Yeah, so diagnosing problems, right? The last slide that I showed, everything was great. We had a green check. I didn't need to worry about anything else. But the moment something happens within that environment, I need to be able to step in and understand, okay, what is wrong and how do I figure out what's wrong? So this shows us a good example of like, hey, this UI, it's very glaring, right? Everything was green and happy and dandy on the last slide, but this one, it's red, and red means danger. And so I at least know, like, hey, when I see, either the red top toolbar, or when I see the red X under deploy, I know something went wrong. But I need to figure out, okay, how did this exactly go wrong, right? What failed within that step of the pipeline in order to allow me to understand what actually happened and what I need to troubleshoot in order to fix that problem. And that involves triaging through thousands of lines of logs, which actually is the next slide. But I saw there was a question. I think there's a question in chat.
Let me see. I want to say one thing is Jenkins has the capability of changing these colors. In some countries, red means good and green means bad. So we want to be inclusive in this community.
Oh, good call out. Thank you.
There's the first questions I have: if with the changes made, which are great, what sort of challenges are you discussing or facing when discussing scaling 3.x in enterprise on the topic of performance? I think that we'll talk a little bit later about that, Michael, right? Or if you want to mention something around scaling, particular to 3.x. I think there's a few things in 3.x.
Yeah, let's I actually have a good segue into that conversation.
Yeah.
I'll let Katie cover this, and then we'll hop into that a little bit.
Yeah, we'll cover it. Don't worry. Good question.
Cool. As I mentioned, once you step into Jenkins, okay, now I need to debug, right? Which, if your build logs are super concise and your steps are super small, which unfortunately could lead to a longer pipeline, that experience could improve some of what we're seeing today on the screen. But unfortunately, at Intuit, our steps can be expansive, right? A deploy step, which involves calling the Argo CD CLI in order to make sure that the changes that you just applied in Git sync out to your cluster. The logs can be quite expansive, right? So having a developer sift through these thousands of lines of logs can give them quite a trouble. As well as I could go through all of these logs and I could see where we're calling the Argo CD CLI, and I could see that it's actually an Argo issue and not necessarily a Jenkins issue. So then unfortunately, I have to leave Jenkins and go out to Argo CD and continue my debugging and troubleshooting process within Argo CD, which Argo CD provides a really great experience for that. but it's the disjointed experience that I'm having today, where I'm having to go from my Jenkins logs to Argo CD, maybe to Splunk, maybe to New Relic, maybe to wherever your logs and where your metrics are, in order to figure out what's wrong. That doesn't necessarily create a cohesive enough experience for us and adds time, which ultimately takes away from developer efficiency and developer velocity.
Yeah, and one point I think we learned out is the pattern of using Argo CD to do the sync, the actual sync. A lot of people, again, we go back to my little bit of rant of Argo CD, that a lot of blog posts put, for demos purposes, they put it in auto sync, right?
Yep.
And I think that creates a wrong impression to a lot of consumers or enterprise users that are beginning for Argo CD for the first time. The first thing they ask is like, well, how do I stop Argo CD from automatically deploying something that is wrong, right? Or how do I test something that is wrong? And I usually go and because you have done public talks, Michael have given public talks around how Intuit does it. Like Intuit uses Jenkins and they run the Argo CD CLI and they put the Argo app in manual and they use Argo CD CLI to do the sync. And that's an imperative call that it goes through the making sure that the health of Argo CD, right? All those Lua scripts that we have in Argo CD, they go healthy. But that's testing is just health checks, right? That's not testing. Then you will do some testing in Jenkins, right? Run the end-to-end test of type of things. But that's usually the process. What you mentioned here is that lives in Jenkins, some pieces live in Argo CD, this joint. But Argo CD, just want to clarify for a lot of people, in production, for certain environments, you will not put it in auto mode, right? You have to have some type of gates, like somebody needs to check somebody or some agent or some process, right? Or automation or a controller needs to check that the gates, those tests are fine to move to the next version. So with that, let's move on to the next. I think it goes to the facing the challenges.
Absolutely. And you highlighted one of the big challenges, right? Is management of quality gates. You call that correctly. It's exactly what Intuit does, right? Where we have that sync call out to Argo CD because we want to make sure that we have quality gates before each and every environment. And implementing those quality gates at scale with something like Jenkins is something that we've had challenges with. But in our deployment processes, we need to make sure that whatever we're putting out into production, it's affecting millions of customers, especially from an Intuit perspective, in a very financial way. So all our releases need to be of the highest of quality. And we need to make sure that we're following software development best practices of making sure that we have our automated testing as a part of those quality gates. And that's a challenge we experience today, right? So just a recap of kind of what I highlighted over the last few slides, right? So lack of central visibility, going back and forth between different tools, and unfortunately different tools not necessarily displaying the latest and accurate information that I'm necessarily looking for. Jenkins scripts are imperative, right? So you go through and you write those custom scripts. And for a company like Intuit, we have our scripts that we vend as best practices out to all of our asset repos. And so that means thousands and thousands of GitHub repos get these imperative scripts. And when we update our best practices, we want to make sure that we're keeping our assets up to date with our best practices. And managing that can be very complex. I mentioned the quality gates. And then, unfortunately, our rollback capabilities, right? Argo CD provides a really powerful rollback capability using that history and rollback feature, which is really great, really quick to get you out of a bind. But unless you understand that, hey, when I use that feature in Argo CD, when I roll back to a different version of my application within Argo CD, I am now out of state with what's on my cluster and what's in Git. So if there's a release coming out the door right behind you, unfortunately, the changes that you just rolled back on production can get overwritten, and you can end up in a position where you're having to do a rollback again, and you're having to stop all of your releases from going out the door manually, and you need to communicate cross teams, especially if you have dependencies that are, going out the door at the same time. It's very complex managing all those lines of communications and making sure that things stay safe in production, especially when you're encountering an incident.
Yeah, perfect illustration on the lessons learned, right? The challenges that we see in Intuit around this. So how do we solve this issue? or improve
So
it?
the short answer is Argo promotions, but I'll make it a long answer just for fun. First, I want to tackle what Blake asked in chat, which is, what are we looking at for performance improvements? And it may seem unrelated, but I'm going to weave them together. In 3.0, we introduced some fixes to improve the problem of lock contention. When you're watching a cluster that has pods scaling up and scaling down, deployments being added and deleted very quickly, Argo CD really struggles to keep a local snapshot of the state of that cluster, because it's changing all this stuff and it has to do it behind locks that end up blocking other processes. Things were very slow. So the cluster cache component was a huge bottleneck, and it still is. We've made some headway there. Some other work that we plan on doing is adopting the new Kubernetes features that allow you to stream events to do an initial list population. So inside baseball, when Argo CD starts up and it starts monitoring your cluster, it lists everything on that cluster. And as you might imagine, that takes some time. When it uses the list API, it receives that state by default in pages of 500 resources. It can only get through those pages so fast. If we use the new streaming API, we can receive all of those events much more quickly, process them more quickly, get your cluster up and running faster, and crucially, avoid timeouts on the pagination. So that's a future that we're looking towards. But to bring it back a little bit more towards promotion, there's new Kubernetes technology besides like watch lists that we're taking advantage of in the new Argo promotions controllers. One of the huge ones is multi-cluster runtime. And we heard about this actually at the last KubeCon. Went to a talk and folks were introducing a version of controller runtime that allows you to monitor multiple clusters. And we're taking advantage of that in Argo promotions to monitor multiple clusters where you might have Argo CD installations. We want to transfer that knowledge into GitOps Engine, into Argo CD, and monitor multiple clusters from Argo CD, potentially using multi-cluster runtime, and get rid of a lot of this older custom code that was written before we had all of that cool stuff built into the Kubernetes ecosystem. So kind of a long answer to say we have a long-term vision for some major improvements we can make in Argo CD, particularly in the cluster cache. So stay tuned for all that. Watch the GitOps Engine repository, because that's where most of that happens. Now, to bring it back to promotions. One way to improve performance is to allow your software to do less stuff. As you mentioned, Carlos, and as Katie pointed out in these long Jenkins logs, Intuit and tons of people currently disable autosync, and they use something to orchestrate those syncs by using the Argo CD CLI, i.e. calling the Argo CD API. That's API load that we could avoid if we were able to turn on autosync and let something else orchestrate promotion. I'll give you an example of where performance problems really caused Intuit some heartache. When we were onboarding MailChimp to use our promotion system, we kept getting failures of these Jenkins pipelines. When it did Argo CD app sync, we would get an internal server error back. And it would only happen 1 in every, I think, 1,000 requests. And it would be buried in this pile of Jenkins logs that they wouldn't understand. It was because Argo CD was experiencing CPU throttling on those API servers. And once we right-sized our limits, that error went away. But if we could have avoided making those API calls in the first place, we wouldn't have encountered that performance issue. So all of that
well,
to
you
say,
didn't talk about like increasing. Some people address the Argo performance issue by virtually scaling, right?
Yeah.
I've seen these controllers taking gigs and gigs and CPUs, right? And people can go by with that, but the streaming should be less memory intensive, right? Less addressing like all these Jenkins pipelines calling this API, right? Less CPU intense workloads, and also the multi-cluster runtime, right, will be less heavy on the cluster APIs, because I come from AWS and I get into some situations, some end users that when they use some of these controllers, not necessarily Argo, but Argo and other controllers, they massively hit the Kube API to get resources. Like list is like the number one, and then these managed EKS, managed Kubernetes services are not infinite scale, right? You have it's up to the clients and the end users to have a shared responsibility, right? So that's why we created a few blog posts of like how to tune the QPS, turn bursting, how to do batching on logs, on events, but it still is not addressing there's improvements, right, that can be done in terms of like a new technology that you mentioned.
Yeah, like we've got all these custom Argo CD environment variables that you can tweak, and they have generally controller runtime equivalents, but it would be so much nicer if we could just rely on all of the experience of the controller runtime community and just use their code to do a good job watching the cluster so that we don't have to build something custom. Yeah, so that's kind of the state of performance in the Argo world. But now let's talk.
So if we stop, you're saying like let's go into, if we stop Jenkins from calling Argo CD CLI to the sync, how do we make auto do not automatically deploy something that I don't want? Yeah, just wait for that gate to be available, right? I think that's where you're going to go into promotions, right?
Yeah. So let's talk about how we get to that stage where everything's automated and auto sync is on. So we have to understand a little bit of history to get there, and I want to talk about how GitOps has evolved up to this point. Where we are with Intuit looks basically like this. You've got a main branch with your, I call them dry, don't repeat yourself deployment manifests. So for us, that's customized. For other folks, it's Helm or JSON, etc. Someone makes a change to their code, and then they bump the image tag in the manifests in the main branch. We have a Jenkins pipeline that is triggered by that push, and it renders the manifests. It calls customized build, and it pushes those branches to a hydrated branch. And we converted this to PowerPoint X, so the D went down, but the hydrated branch. And from there, it calls the promotion pipeline, which invokes Argo CD, calls Argo CD app sync, and that syncs it out to the cluster.
And that branch is an orphan branch, right? They're not for humans, I guess, right?
It's not for humans. Sometimes humans we encounter will make tweaks there, temporary changes, or they'll do reverts. Ideally, we want to get to a world where, we want to get to a place where they have automation that does that for them. But for today, it works okay. We push to this, supposedly completely managed hydrated branch, and then the user doesn't have to worry about it. But yeah, so on the next slide, we talk about what the future we hope will look like. So we anticipate using the hydrator feature, and we've already started using this on some Argo CD Intuit assets. We use the source hydrator feature to render not just to one hydrated branch, but to one branch per environment. So we push to basically a staging environment. We call it dev next, stage next, prod next. And then a new tool called GitOps Promoter, and it lives in Argo Labs. It knows how to automatically open pull requests from that proposed branch to the active branch, the one that Argo CD is actually syncing from. So it opens those PRs, boom, 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 1, 2, 3 for the 3 environments. And then GitOps Promoter solves the problem you were mentioning earlier, which is how do you gate these promotions? It monitors user configurable gates, and then in the correct order merges those pull requests. So we'll monitor the previous environment's health, perform any additional checks you care about, merge, and then Argo CD auto syncs that. So instead of having this sort of time gap where we're not quite ready to deploy a change that's been requested, instead of having that live in a Jenkins pipeline that's extremely difficult to follow and read and debug, we have it live in a PR, which developers already understand. They know how to read the little check marks and the red X's that are in the GitHub or the GitLab interface, et cetera. And we take advantage of a lot of the primitives that already exist. So this is sort of the shape of the solution.
So the six branches that we see here are non-human. I keep saying like agents are going to take over, right? The non-human branches, this is for automation purposes. So these could be branches, there could be boxes, there could be OCI images, I don't know, right?
Yeah.
It could be S3 buckets, but it's non-human like containers, right? Those branches right now are orphan branches, I guess, like not for humans. And the merge in the middle, the PR it's double purpose, right? Is the double purpose of like awareness, right? That if somebody needs to come, a human needs to come back and say like, hey, what this happened? When did it happen? They can see that PR there. But also like that PR, you're using it as an anchor to say, I'm going to have gates, and that gate could be waiting, could be testing, right? And if onto that gate doesn't happen, then this is an order pipeline from top to bottom. Is that an accurate summary?
That's accurate. And you're right. A key point is humans don't touch these branches. The first thing people see when they see this slide is, oh my goodness, this is branch-based environments. That's not the case. We follow the best practice of all of your environments are represented in a single main branch. But on the fully automated side, as an implementation detail, we split that up into branches for you. So all the user experience issues that are associated with environment or branch-based environments don't exist in this solution.
So the main branch, the one on the people are watching on the left, the main one, that one could still continue to be folders for the base, right? Folder per environment, folder per region. The typical scenario where like actually many Argo CD contributors from the community advertise that's a good pattern, right? That humans can deal with a repository of folders and they deal with those environments. I think the fear is around people don't do 6 branches daily, right? And work with multiple branches, and they don't do Git workspaces. That's for like people that do Git all their day, right? We just DevOps. We just want to store some YAML somewhere, configuration for the cloud. But those branches on the right are for automation purposes, right? Not the humans are not going to work with that. I just want to make that clear because I think we'll keep doing it in ArgoCon, we'll do it in blogs, we'll do it in talks, right? Because I think we need to get people aware of like the architecture.
Correct. Yeah. So where the rubber meets the road is this CRD. Who actually opens and blocks and merges those pull requests? And the answer is GitOps Promoter. We have created this CRD and associated controller called Promotion Strategy. And I'm extremely proud of how few lines of code there are in this file. We want to know first active commit statuses, which just means a gate that gets applied between your environments. In this case, we wait for the previous environment's Argo CD app health to become healthy. And then we have the branches that store the active state of each of those environments. And each of those branches can represent one Argo CD app. It could represent 20 Argo CD apps. The GitOps Promoter really doesn't care what is in these branches. It doesn't even care that it's Kubernetes manifests. You were mentioning, well, it could be OCI artifacts. One example I like to give is images on a CDN. Maybe you want to have a CDN that you have a transformation step where it like compresses an image and then you ship that image to different waves of a CDN. It could do that. It doesn't care what's in your main branch, which I think is a huge advantage over our CI-based solutions, where it has to be aware of what's in that main branch and go bump image tags and you do YQ commands. We don't do any of that. We promote whatever is in your manifests or whatever's in these branches. So this opens PRs and then merges them in that order with the Argo CD health check between.
So in this case, this is a new CRD, right? And it's a project that lives in the Argo Labs that you can use. So it's not modifying the main CRDs that we have in Argo CD, like the Argo projects, Argo application sets, and Argo apps.
Correct. Let's see. Yeah, and this is, I think in our other slides, it may have been a GIF, but it's okay. The static image here works. We need a UI for GitOps Promoter or for the promotion system in general. And the way we're going to do that is by building an Argo CD UI extension so that when you're looking at the application that holds your promotion strategy, it presents to you the state of the promotion. And this is just a relatively early mock-up. We're going to evolve on this a lot, but the basic idea is it's going to show you you've got 3 environments. It's going to tell you whether they're healthy, degraded, or otherwise. And then if you have a change that's actively being promoted through those environments, we'll present that to you, say what the change is, and we'll communicate to you anything that's blocking those changes being deployed.
I think I have a...
You probably have the newer image that I sent you.
Yeah, this is...
Oh, there it is. Now we've got it in motion.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is the UI for humans, right? Like humans like to see things are dynamic, right? And they're progressing through a pipeline. What is the status? What's going on? If something's not healthy, they can see and then click and jump directly to Git, for example, right?
Correct. And so Katie and I sort of represent maybe the devil and the angel standing on the shoulder of this project, because I always come at the project from the sense of, well, we want everything to be visible in GitHub and in Git. We want people to be able to look at PRs. But Katie comes from the other side of very much focusing on the developer experience, and like maybe that is insufficient to really meet our users' needs. So Katie can fill in the blanks for why this isn't just a GitHub solution.
Yeah, falling back to some of the problem statements that I was stating earlier, right? Like really understanding, I want a single place where I can take a look at the health of all my environments, what version is currently running there, and like something that's relevant to me, right? Like I need to be able to understand what code is actually running on each individual environment, whether it's healthy or not, what checks it passed. And if something is actively coming down the pipe, if a rollback has taken place, all this information is extremely valuable to me to have at a glance when I'm wearing my developer persona, from a developer velocity perspective when I'm constantly trying to push my releases out the door. This information, having it at the drop of a hat in one single place, provides developers with an extreme amount of confidence that allows them to move as fast as they want to be when pushing things out to production, without feeling the need to, pause things just so they can feel they can wrap their head around the current state of each individual environment. They'll feel significantly more confident to be able to have auto sync on, which will ultimately allow for no hands-on releases. The computers do the magic, and developers focus on what matters most, which is writing high quality code and making sure production is running happy for their customers.
I think Michael has a demo. Do we have time to go over that?
Yeah, we've got a demo on the next slide. We should share it from Google Slides, because the PPTX doesn't like our animations, apparently.
I don't have permissions to play the video, but if you can share your screen.
We'll try. And then if it doesn't work, I will just narrate in excruciating detail exactly what's happening in the video. Now we'll just talk through it.
So go ahead, share your screen.
In the right window.
And the demo that Michael is going to walk us through right now is a beautiful demo walking through the experience that we have today, that if you want to go to today to GitHub, download GitOps Promoter, like this experience is available today for everybody to use. The UI is something that we're talking about within the months to come to provide that developer experience. But that doesn't mean that what we have today doesn't provide enhancements that add value to developers. And Michael's going to show you that right now.
And if it's okay, Carlos, let me pause to grab a couple of these questions from chat, because I think they fit really nicely here.
Yeah.
So Colin is asking. Yeah. So Colin was asking about details about the hydrated process for manifests. It's more commonly been called the rendered manifest pattern. I tend to call it hydrated because you get the nice equivalent of, well, you have dry and then you have hydrated manifests. But platforms community linked the documentation for source hydrator, which is the Argo CD implementation. Also look around for folks from CodeFresh and Acuity. I think have both written really great blog posts about the rendered manifest pattern. So go take a peek.
Yeah, and Nick and Christian. Yeah, Nick and Christian have a couple of YouTube videos and talks actually. There's ArgoCon talks.
Yeah, and then we've got the question, how does this differ from Cargo? So there's a page in the GitOps Promoter documentation that compares the various options available for GitOps promotions. I can try to summarize it quickly. I think of CodeFresh GitOps, I think is what they call it, and Cargo as both systems that operate on the dry manifests. So I'm going to get a little bit into the weeds, but all of our CI pipelines that we're using to orchestrate promotion today, generally what they're doing is running YQ or customize edits against YAML in the dry branch of your manifests. The problem with that is your promotion system now has to be aware of the contents of that branch. And if you change your directory structure, or if you change something from Helm to customize, or change anything like that, the system is brittle and it breaks, and you have to go update your manifests, your promoter manifest to match that. GitOps Promoter drew a very hard line of, it's still your job to bump your image tag in your manifests, but that's relatively organization specific and it's relatively easy to implement. We're going to take the hard job of gating promotions, of moving YAML basically from one branch to another. And we're going to simplify that down to the most basic it can be and focus on that. That means that your promotion strategy YAML, the thing that describes how we actually promote things through environments and gate them, that's 10 lines instead of potentially hundreds of lines that are trying to re-implement your CI process using YAML. And that's not always the experience you're going to have with another tool like CodeFresh or Cargo provides. Those are going to solve a style of problem that potentially GitOps Promoter will struggle with, because maybe you just have an environment that happens to be very complex. So evaluate the tools, understand their differences, and then pick the one that matches your environment. Don't necessarily try to shoehorn one tool into an environment that doesn't make sense for it.
So, Michael, let me see. I think I was going to ask, like, the gating, right? You said the 10 lines of code says it has an array, so it has order of like what do you want to promote. So the one depends on the previous one, and the dependency is that the previous ones, the health should be or health or it's ready, right? Let's say ready, let's Kubernetes talk. Ready equals true.
Yeah.
Right? That condition. Let's talk about conditions. I don't know if we have to change the nomenclature, but the condition of the previous pipeline needs to be ready equals true. And today in the promoter, the code is going to use specific GitHub APIs, gates status to get that condition. Does the promoter has the capability or the architecture to support GitLab or Bitbucket or a different API, like a custom API, REST API that I write? Maybe it's an adapter to something that I have internal that maybe is old, right? It's not modernized.
Yeah. So I think there are a couple questions there. One, how do we do gating on previous environments? And two, what systems can I use like GitHub, GitLab, et cetera, to integrate with this? I'll answer the second one first. Today, there's a very simple interface in the GitOps Promoter repo, which is all implemented in Golang, that if you implement that interface for your SCM, then your SCM is supported. We started with GitHub because that's what Intuit uses, GitHub Enterprise. People have very quickly contributed support for GitLab and for, I'm going to mispronounce it, but I think it's Forgeo. So those were relatively small PRs and pretty easy to implement. If you don't want to use an SCM, this system is capable of just having the commit statuses on the Kubernetes cluster, and they can still be used by the promoter system without necessarily reflecting that up to the SCM. Now, if you go that way, that means you're not going to get your green check marks and your red X's in the pull request interface, but the system will still basically work.
So there's a CRD to represent that conditions. try to not to use the word Git, right? Because in their interfaces, but there's a CRD that another controller can control the values on that CR, which is the conditions that this controller is waiting for. So
Correct.
it can be manipulated by time, right? A lot of environments have, at least in where I work, we have a exponential time bake time where we promote one environment, but we have to wait 2 hours before we promote the next set, and then we have to wait not 2 hours but less time. Is that possible to add that time or sleep? I don't know what to call it there.
There
Extension?
is. So Zach Aller has been an advocate for exactly that commit status controller for a long time. And at some point, we'll make that available by default. But the idea is that anyone can implement that. We expose the commit status CRD. And if I were you, the way I would implement that is I'd write a new CRD that has a reference to the promotion strategy. So it can list those environment names. And then all it has to do is create a commit status CR for each of those environments, and then don't set it to
right?
successful until you've, a certain amount of time has passed, and exponentially more per commit status. Yeah, so the idea is anyone can implement these and have whatever gates they want.
Cool. Does the video work, or I was just
We're about to find out. It looked like it was working. Here's hoping. Yeah, it's working. Things are moving. Okay, so on the right side, I've got some applications that represent a dev, test, prod setup. I've got 2 apps in test and prod. And on the left side, I'm just going to make a manifest change. I'm just bumping a common annotation. And I think I bumped an image tag too there. So that changes multiple things in the manifests, even though it's a relatively small change. On the right side, very quickly, we're hydrating that change in the development application. So that's the first way that we're going to communicate to the promoter that there's a new change to promote. The hydrator pushed to the development next branch, and we're scrolling through and seeing what that manifest looks like. So we've got that history. This is precisely what changed in the manifests, and this is precisely what we're going to ship. GitOps Promoter opens PRs for promoting to dev, test, and prod. Hasn't merged any of them yet. And I can scroll through here and again, see exactly what change is actually going to ship. And then I'm going to manually click merge. You can disable auto merge. Generally, this would be auto approved and auto merged. I just made it manual so that I could slow down the demo and walk through it. Now we're waiting on staging. So on the right side, you can see that the development application went out of sync briefly, and now it's progressing. We've synced it. Auto sync was on. And on the left side, staging is waiting for environment/development, that branch and all the apps that are in it, to become synced and healthy. On the right side, we see that the rollout is still working, and then it just became healthy. So again, back to the left, we expect that this check should become green, and then GitOps Promoter will automatically merge the pull request. There's a slight delay. When you set up webhooks, this becomes very, very fast. So GitOps Promoter just merged that. On the right side, I'm going to click over to an app that's in staging, and you'll see it go out of sync. It'll auto sync. Now it's progressing. And again, rollouts is running through some steps to do a canary analysis on the API that's being deployed. And on the left side, I've clicked into the pull request that represents the production environment, and it's blocked on the staging environment. This is just an example of a check that you can implement. This could be a list of 10 different checks if you need 10 different checks to block your production environment. Right side still working, just became healthy. Left side, we'll see that this check goes green, and then this PR auto merges. I didn't click anything in the SCM. This was all just presented to me and all just happened automatically for me. On the right side, out of sync, I don't click anything. Auto sync is on, so it's quickly synced and then goes progressing. So that was fast, but like everything kind of happened for me based on one commit that I made to the dry manifests.
And fast is good, right? We're optimizing for developer velocity here and release velocity. We want to make sure that people have confidence, they have the insights that they need to move forward, but that we're also moving quickly and efficiently. And Michael's solution the GitOps, the demo that Michael just gave us, solved a lot of the problems that I mentioned earlier, right? we remained in sync, right? Auto sync was on. We didn't have to touch any buttons, right? So human was essentially removed from the situation if you wanted to, if you have the confidence in your release gates that are in there to be able to send things automatically through to production. It was completely audible. And even without a pretty UI, everything was extremely visible. So the power of an SCM, providing that visibility into the diffs and changes and the checks that are happening on each environment is extremely powerful. A UI will enhance that and, increase that developer NPS score and those happiness and joyful feelings that we're all searching for in our day-to-day lives. It was completely declarative and very clear exactly what was happening across promotion for each of our environments. And it was very reliable, right? So the developer challenges that I expressed earlier, are essentially addressed with a solution, which, makes me as a product manager very happy.
That's very good. And I'm putting a link to the Argo CD Promoter has documentation, and it has a getting started section that anyone can give it a try. I know there's questions, but we're running out of time. But has a getting started, has an architecture, and then you can give it a try. Like the documentation is on par. Usually when projects start like this, they don't have any docs. So I'm very impressed that there's an MK docs and everything using the Argo CD theme, the green one. So it's there. Check it out. So I think we're out of time today, but I want to appreciate Katie and Michael's time for today, joining the platforms to show the Argo promotion and what's new in Argo 3.0. So until next time, thank you so much, and keep watching. And there's more streams coming soon. See you, folks.
Thank you, Carlos. See y'all.
Thank you.